All right, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon to some. I am Rev Bruce, and we are here with Live at Lunch Bible Study. I'm here with Pastor Powell. And how you doing today, Pastor Powell?
You're doing wonderful. God is
All right.
good.
Yes, sir. And we're continuing this Jeremiah journey. We're here with week 37. And basically, what we're doing with this is we're looking at Jeremiah in this 37th chapter, and really what Jeremiah has to go through during this chapter, along with the children of Israel and the people of Judah. And so, Pastor, give me your summation of what you saw in this chapter as you read it.
In this chapter, we see the Israelites standing on false hopes and standing against what God is telling them. And they're going to have to pay a horrific price for not listening to the voice of the man, Jeremiah, whom God appointed as prophet over them. And the thing that just amazes me is how obstinate they have become as we move through this book. Now we're on chapter 37. They just have seemed to have made up their mind, and we don't care what God says. We're going to do what we want to do. And because we're God's people, he's going to have to take care of us. And God is saying something totally different.
So you think it was entitlement?
Yes, that's a very, very good word. Feeling that because back at when God called Abraham, that they, were his people. And so they're entitled to whatever they're in. How can I say it? They feel that they're so entitled that they can do anything, and God still must respond and deliver them.
Well, one of their things, even later on with Jesus, was that they were descendants of Abraham, and that was enough.
Right.
They had Abraham as their father, and that gave them enough entitlement in being the children of God. Who else you got? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's a sticking point for me. When I read it, it was the two questions that Jeremiah asked of King Zedekiah when he's talking to him during his imprisonment. And the first question he asked was, what have I done to you or your servants or this people that you put me in prison?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But I don't deserve this. What's this about? And then secondly, he broke it down and said, where are your prophets who prophesied to you, saying the king of Babylon will not come against you and against this land? Like, where are those people now that were telling you this wouldn't happen and this wouldn't go down? Where are they now? And so from my viewpoint, I see this as Jeremiah saying, hey, look, we're in this now, and you're up here imprisoning me, you and your people, and I've done you no wrong, done no harm towards you, and those who lied to you, where are they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's what struck me.
Another thing is You know, King Nebuchadnezzar put this Zedekiah over the kingdom, and even he was obstinate until he got desperate, and then he sent for Jeremiah, wanting to know if there was a word from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremiah said to him, well, yeah, there's a word, but you don't want to hear it. And basically what Jeremiah was saying was, I really don't want to tell it to you, because every time I tell you something, things get worse for me.
Mm-hmm.
But the king told him, go ahead, tell me what the Lord has said, and no harm will come to you. And he told him, and the king, he told him straight, you're going to be taken into captivity. This city is going to fall.
Mm-hmm.
But the only reason why it was going to fall was because they were disobedient to God.
Yeah, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say in the Bible that they would listen to reason.
Right.
It just inquired, was there a word from the Lord? And
Absolutely.
they
And
got that
you know,
word. Yeah.
I find that same thing today. People want to know, well, what is God's will? And then when
Mm-hmm.
God lets them know what his will is, oh, well, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else.
Well, that's because people got free choice,
Right.
and free will.
Mm-hmm.
And in a day and age where it seems like everybody's doing what seems to be right, as it says in the Bible, in their own eyes,
Yeah.
then I might as well too. I had somebody tell me yesterday, well, then when in Rome, I
Do
said,
as the
well,
Romans do.
I said, well, I said I'll add to that and say when in Rome, do like Hannibal did and change the game,
Mm-hmm.
and change the paradigm, But it's a matter of, are you going to indulge in a mindset that says God said it, but I think I can get away with X, Y, and Z?
Right.
Or are you going to engage from a spiritual level of faith and say, you know what, I can submit to, what God has going on here, and I will submit myself to this. Um, that's the whole idea and premise behind the song "All to Jesus I Surrender."
Mm-hmm.
It's he can't be Lord if you don't let him
If we don't surrender to him.
be Lord over it. That
Mm-hmm.
requires some submission. And so, looking at this, there had to be some form of submission for Nebuchadnezzar to make him the king instead of Kania, which was, we go back to it. We look at this um, in another instance when you take uh, the lineage out of the order of birth, right? And you create a substitute. That's the same thing that that Manasseh, you see with Manasseh and Eliam, you know, and that's the part that comes out of the line of Joseph, but is really an act that was conducted by the grandfather, Jacob. And for anyone who knows Jacob and his practices as a parent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm sorry, the other son was Ephraim. I'm sorry. And so the act that Joseph does is protest his dad giving the blessing to Ephraim instead of Manasseh.
Right.
And when we look at this, that's the protocols, where one is substituted out of order, but is given a higher rank. He wasn't the oldest son, but by receiving the blessing, he received a higher rank
Right.
than the oldest son. And fast forward, that pushes us to where Jesus, right? Um, when we talk about it, we begin to see Jesus, when we talk about Jesus being the firstborn of our salvation, right?
Right.
He wasn't the first to die, right? But based upon his death in rank order, he's the firstborn, and so he's the protokos,
Right.
right? And so um, by definition and by action, the action that he took, Jesus is the protokos, and I put the definition here in the chat. But when we see this done in a earthly sense, Zedekiah was not king out of the lineage order. He was king out of another assignment by um, someone that only had military control of the area,
Right.
right? And so, given that, um, by the loose definition of it, it still fits what would be considered the example of protokos in biblical terms as it relates to things such as Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as the blessing of Jacob. And let me say this: Jacob, from a parenting standpoint, Jacob had already demonstrated with Joseph and his other sons that he was playing favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And that had created some problems and some issues um, among his sons, even between him and Joseph at one point. And so this goes to show you his character continued on into his old age. You've got to remember who Jacob was, right? When we talked about Ephraim before, and this whole idea of him being this son who would be blessed, you got to remember Jacob was the same one who went through all that with his uncle Laban, who thought he was slick too, right? And
Right.
this
And,
is
and Jacob also stole his brother's birthright.
yeah. And then you've got Jacob's mama, who was Laban's sister, and I mean it's just a family affair.
Right.
You
Big
know what I
mess.
mean? And so in considering that, um, that's one example of how um, the blessing and lineage get thrown off. And so when we look at the line of kings of Israel and Judah, now when we see Zedekiah being in place, Zedekiah is basically a puppet king
Mm-hmm.
of Judah, established by an invading government, not based upon the lineage as the family structure in the royal family, you know. So I hope y'all got that and picked up on that. That's how uh, he got there. And so um, the text says neither he nor his servants or the people of the land listened to the words of the Lord that he spoke through Jeremiah. It says nobody was listening.
Mm-hmm.
And take that into account. And if that's what's happening, it's no wonder that when the rumors come about the army of Pharaoh, the army out of Egypt, the Egyptian army, everybody then is a buzz. Everybody then is looking for answers, and you've got the Babylonians getting ready to pull out of Jerusalem when they hear the news about the mightiest army in the world coming that way. And then you've got people in Judah and Jerusalem saying, hey, it's all taken care of.
Yeah, we've been saved.
You know, and so the rumors are a buzz, and nothing has anything to do with the word of God. Nothing has anything to do with what God has said through his prophet. And this army of Egypt, Pharaoh's army, is, as it says here, one of the most powerful armies in the world. And you could see why the Chaldeans would pull out, the Babylonians would pull out. They say, hey, man, you know, we don't mind invading this little community of sheep herders, but we're not going to fight these men in iron chariots. We're not about to fight that. And so one of the things I was able to pull out through Dr. Claude Mariattini and his website that he did with his study on Pharaoh and the Egyptian army. They were composed of, as it says, horses and chariots, charioteers, and fighting men.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And with their usage of the horse, they were able to, utilize the horse and the chariot and to actually get these things that were symbols of power. And so when you read in the Bible, some trust in horses and some trust in chariots, right? That's in line with the worldview of their day. It says some trust in princes, some trust in, that's in line with the worldview and thinking of their day, that some people have laid their trust in the power that they have among men and in wartime. But we put our trust in the name of the Lord, and so that's the situation where everything is a buzz, and everybody is thinking the Egyptians have come to save the day. But in verse 9, God says it plainly. Thus says the Lord, do not deceive yourselves, saying the Chaldeans will surely go away from us, for they will not go away. They're not going anywhere. This thing isn't over. We've said that multiple times over the last couple of weeks about this thing isn't over, and here it is again. Just when they think they have relief and in the form of the Egyptian army, this thing is not over. They're not going anywhere.
And that brings up a point that we can apply to our lives today. If we reject God's word, his hand of judgment will fall upon us. There is no hope whatsoever, no disguise, no hiding, we can't charm God. Well, you know, God, yeah, I did this, but, you know, I'm your child. Your ways, God's just not going to accept anything from us. If we
Mhm.
say we are Christians, we are going to have to live like Christians. And for them, since they said, oh, we're God's chosen people, God was expecting them to live like God's chosen people. And
Mhm.
they were refusing to do it.
Yeah. Well, it says it in the first couple of verses. They did not listen to the prophet. They didn't listen to what God had to say. It wasn't just the king.
Right.
It was him
His
and
advisors.
all
Mm-hmm.
the people of that land. They were not listening to what God had to say, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
if they're not listening to it, they're not going to adhere to it either. You know what I mean? There's no question about that. You know, there's no doubt about that. They're not going to do anything about it. And they're not going to do anything with it.
And this shows you how the command of God is so sure. Because in verse 10, he says, for though you have defeated the whole army of the Chaldeans who fight against you,
Mm-hmm.
and there remains only wounded men among them,
Mm-hmm.
they would rise up, every man in his tent, and burn the city with fire. So God is
So
saying,
yeah.
if they only had, I'm so behind them that if even all their men are wounded, they're still going to destroy this city because of your disobedience.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to God's intent. He said before, if it's his anger which can't be kindled until this, which can't be extinguished until this is complete.
Right.
It's kindled. It's a blaze. It's a fire, and it can't be extinguished or quenched until this has been brought to completion. Until there's been restitution. Uh, take it. Take a step back and go back to when we talk about sin. Sin still has its penalty until the price is paid. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
And it has to either be paid by Christ
mm-hmm.
or each person who rejects Christ has to pay for his own sins throughout all eternity.
Yeah. So there's for lack of a better term, the economy of it is, you know, you're either redeemed, right, which is purchased by his blood, right? I keep going back to the same song. Now we're a purchase of his blood, right? And so now the other side of it is to remain in sin and quote unquote darkness while we were enemies of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And still have to be responsible for our own sins. And the penalty for sin is death.
Absolutely.
And not just to expire, but an everlasting death, right? Which is
Actually, death is
totally different.
it's separation from God forever. That's real death.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, the individual himself or herself don't die. They suffer throughout all eternity. And in a way, that's very difficult for us to comprehend because we're locked in time, and time,
Mm-hmm.
is linear. But eternity as one writer describes it, is circular. There's no end to a circle.
Well, it's perpetual.
Perpetual.
It
Yes, that's
continues.
a better word.
It continues.
Continues forever.
And so our earthly viewpoint, we have no idea of that.
Right.
Plants die, seasons change, like you said, things move in a linear motion. We get older, we don't sit and hold an age for any particular time other than the span of a year. And then we age on. So our concept isn't there. But what God is saying is, here it is. This is what has to transpire in order for things to move on and for me to say this thing is done with. So look at it, right? You've got now, in the midst of this whole thing with the Chaldeans, making a move, and the Egyptians potentially coming in, Jeremiah's idea, well, I'm gonna go in here with everybody else and lay claim to, my property. You know what I mean? And in doing so, he gets snatched up by one of the sentries, one of the guards, who claims Jeremiah is going off to desert with the Chaldeans. And Jeremiah says, it's a lie. I'm not trying to do that. But the man still takes Jeremiah to the officials, and they get mad at Jeremiah. They beat him, and then they lock him up at the house of Jonathan. This one says the secretary, but Jonathan's a scribe, for it had been made into a prison. And so, go ahead.
It seems like they wanted to make sure that anyone who said anything other than what they wanted to hear, they had personal control over that individual. And that's why his house was turned into a prison, where they had total personal control over the life of the individual in question.
And so this idea of being falsely accused is troubling, because go back to verse 2. Nobody has listened to a word or the words that the prophet has spoken. Right? And now you've got this thing going on where he's being accused, right, of dipping to the other side. He's being accused of being a traitor. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like, out of everything I've said and done, you think I'm going to go over there? That's a lie. But the sentiment is, well, he must be going over there. He ain't coming over here to be with us. He's not coming out to do anything to be among us. Surely not. And so the story is built on this assumption, which then becomes an accusation, right? And so the assumption is Jeremiah is not with us. The assumption is Jeremiah is not one of us.
Right. And the reason why they felt that way is because he wasn't saying what they wanted to hear. But you know, if you go back to Deuteronomy 11:26, God warns them, behold, I set before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the command of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and the curse if you do not obey the command of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I commanded you today, and go after other gods which you have not known. And that's exactly what they did. Um, this other God thing has brought so much tragedy to Israel, and I would say the same thing for many other nations throughout history that once served the Lord and then they turned their back on the Lord, and the Lord had to bring judgment upon them.
Mm-hmm. But that's the problem.
Yes.
Isn't that what led to all this in the beginning? Where he said, you've transgressed, you've broken the covenant, you've gone after other gods. But what's different about that? There's nothing different about that.
Right.
It's the same issue, but with increasing amounts of consequences. And other pieces are beginning to fall apart based upon the same fundamental issue. And to add on top of that, I'm giving you a way out and you still haven't taken it.
And he gave them that way out many times, and they refused to take it.
Well, speak on it. I mean, that's isn't that many of us?
Well,
we struggle with a particular sin or obsession or addiction, and I don't know what to do, and God's given us a way out, and we still drift back to it.
yes.
We still find ourselves enraptured in it and caught up in it. It's so if you take these people as a personality, they're not that different from us. God, if you can just get me out right now, I won't touch it again.
Mm-hmm.
And 10 days later,
back into it.
You saying the same prayer?
That reminds me of Proverbs 1:29, where he says, "For they hate knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Mm-hmm. They would not listen to my counsel. They despised all my reproofs. Therefore shall they eat the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices." And that's what we're really seeing here. They sowed the wind. Now they're reaping the whirlwind. And in my observation of people, they enjoy sowing to the wind, but when the whirlwind comes, they don't want to receive it, but there's nothing they can do to stop it.
Well, I'll take you back, a little bit in the Exodus story.
Mm-hmm.
God is on the mountain with Moses and Joshua, and his other attendants are not that far away, and Joshua says it sounds like war is going on down there, and God says, no, that's not. You need to go down there and check with these people, because they've made themselves a golden calf and they're up there dancing and doing all this other stuff. And Moses has the tablets of the law. Where he's been gone that long because he's been getting the law from God to bring it to the people. But the people, well, they press on Aaron a little bit, and Aaron said, well, okay, bring me your earrings and your necklaces and whatever you got. And they form that calf. But the correction of it is not just people being taken out. A lot of people look at, well, Moses just cut them down, and yeah, that's part of the correction. But the other part of the correction was he burnt that thing, broke it up, made it into powder, added water, and made them drink it.
Right.
You've got to. You want to indulge in this, then take it all down.
Right.
You want to get involved in this, take it all down.
Make it a part of you.
And so that's what you're saying. You're saying, hey, if you're going to partake in it, it's
just get all the way in.
It's gonna be an all-encompassing thing.
Right.
And so this idea of going to other gods has led to an all-consuming destruction. Like God said, even if all they had was some wounded men left in some tents, I would give them enough strength to burn this place down. Because that's my intent. And what we fail to do is recognize God's intent. You just read it. You just read it, right?
Absolutely.
I'm placing before you a blessing and a curse. This is twofold. And depending on what you do is going to create the outcome. Depending on how you handle it will predicate the outcome. But we don't see it that we just look at God's intent. The bold Christian that says, well, God said I'm supposed to be the head and not the tail. Well, but how are you acting? How are you carrying that out? You understand what I mean? You cannot.
We can't pick and choose.
You can't bounce in and out.
Right.
You can't be wavering. And I think that part of it is and this is the part with picking parts of the scripture. What predicates this is we're supposed to love God with all our heart and all of our being. And if we're doing that, yes.
We don't have time for other gods.
But if we're not, now we've forced a jealous God to therefore be jealous. He's got reason. We've given him reason. You know what I mean? The trust is broken. The covenant is falling apart. And now, how do you make amends for that? And God says, hey, come back to me and I'll be with you. You'll be my people and I'll be your God. No, we don't want to take that right now. Send those Babylonians our way. Hey, if you don't come back to me and be my people and I'll be your God, then it's going to be 70 years of captivity. And then I'm gonna bring another, I'm gonna bring your sons and daughters, and they'll be my people, and I'll be their God. Yeah, we can handle that. You're not really gonna do that. And so that's we're just at the brink of reality for Judah. You know what I mean?
Right.
They've gotten a taste of it, but they don't feel the full force of being invaded. They said, well, they still left one of us in charge. I think we're still good. And the Egyptians are on the way. I think we're still good. We might be able to pull this one off. which totally, throw caution to the wind and all that other stuff. We're not listening to God, which is key because next is Zedekiah calling on Jeremiah, and he's asking, hey, is there a word from the Lord? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And this is after Jeremiah has, been locked up at Jonathan's house for many a days. And in verse 17, he just says it, is, hey, what you got? Is there a word from the Lord? And I think Jeremiah's answer is like, yeah, there is. You're going to be delivered into the hand of the king of Babylon. Ain't nothing changed. The message remains the same.
Right.
And to go along with that, Jeremiah takes advantage of this opportunity and he asks, like I said, he asked, he has some key questions to Zedekiah. And the first one is, what wrong have I done to you and your servants, this people, that you put me in prison?
Right.
Almost like Jesus, for what offense would you stone me? You know what I mean? What are the charges? What do we got? What we got going on here? What are the charges? Why am I in here? And then he asks, where are the prophets who prophesied to you, saying the king of Babylon will not come against you and against this land? Where are the people who lied to you? Where are the people who told you, no, God ain't going to do that to you. No, you ain't going to worry about that. Where are they today? How come they're not in here? As you face a pending invasion that I am confirming with you through the Lord that it's still coming and it's still going down. Where them folks at? And so those questions matter.
Absolutely.
And they mean something in the context of, look, I've been preaching this thing and you haven't taken heed not once. I've been preaching this thing consistently and you keep asking as if something's going to change. And you've made no change on your end, so why would God change?
Why would God change?
And so what is it? And so here's a note to the Christian out there, the person who's believing, what something's not changing, you're not changing, and you're turning to God, hey, make it change. But you haven't demonstrated a willingness to move, a willingness to accept. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You can open your mouth in prayer and still not open your heart to receive what God has for you. And that's the dangerous part of
And a very
faith.
powerful part that all of us have to look at continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Our prayers can just be words, or our prayers can be a sincere cry from our heart.
Yeah.
And God knows the difference.
That's the key.
Right.
And so if God knows the inner person, God knows our hearts.
Right.
He knows our intents. He knows our motives. Right. And you'll hear this often in the Bible, different phrasing, but basically, don't deceive yourself. Don't lie to yourself. This is how this is going to work. This is how this is going to pan out. This is how this is going to work out. And so, our ability to see this example and remain open, right? You see, what we don't see is the public display of Jeremiah being taken in and beaten. There had to be other people who were moving about and getting ready to go into the land and through the gates when the guard, the sentry, took Jeremiah. There had to be people who witnessed the confrontation between the two when Jeremiah said it's a lie. Right? There had to be people who had eyes on what was going on in the courtyard when the officials got mad and called for Jeremiah to be beaten. Somebody witnessed that. And someone had to know, hey, no, he's up in Jonathan's house. They got him locked up. They made that into a prison. That's what Jeremiah is right now. And so that's why in the ESV it says King Zedekiah sent for him and received him. The king questioned him secretly in his house. You got that?
Absolutely.
This was not this was not something that that was public.
He didn't want to hear what the others had to say to refute Jeremiah. He probably came to the point where he realized Jeremiah is the true prophet of God, and I need to hear what God is saying.
Yeah. And in the NIV and the NASB and other versions, it's not his house. It's the palace.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so we know, most of us know where a king lives. That's his palace. And he asked him secretly. He asked him privately. So we've gone from this public humiliation of this man of God to bringing him into the palace and secretly asking him, is there a word from the Lord? You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
The gravity of that, right? That we see the same thing in Acts. They hey, don't preach in that name anymore, right? What's the gravity of that? That publicly we're just gonna lay hands on you and bring you in before the Sanhedrin, but privately we're gonna tell you don't preach in that name, don't teach in that name, and we're gonna beat you and then let you go.
Mm-hmm.
But here it is. But now I want to know: is it privately? I want to know: is there something? Is there something I should know? Same thing I've been telling you. Same thing you got me locked up for. It's going down. And wasn't, tell me if I'm wrong, wasn't Nicodemus a Pharisee?
Absolutely.
clean, no association with unclean, but he goes to Jesus, who foxes have holes, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, goes to Jesus at night and says, hey, we know you're a good teacher. What's this thing about? How are we to be in the right standing with God? He didn't bring the rest of the Pharisaical order with him. He didn't say, hey man, we really got to check out what this Jesus is talking about, and grab his buddies with him. Nicodemus came, as it says, Nicodemus came to Jesus at night,
And that tells us something.
the
Each
cover
one
of
of us
darkness,
has to come
right?
to Jesus individually and personally. It can't be a group thing.
No, and it's plain, right? And so let me help somebody that's reading the Bible. There was a man, right? And by by biblical assumption, when you say there was a man, in most cases when they're talking, it's assumed he's a Jewish man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the Pharisees. That means he's a Jewish man of a particular order, of this particular order of this sect of teachers and priests, named Nicodemus, a ruler of the Jews. He was a leader. And he came to Jesus by night, right? And so this idea that um, my public face is one thing, but I'm showing something else privately. I have a different concern privately.
Mm-hmm.
My public face, I stand with them and what they represent and what they say, but privately, I'm coming to you under this cloak of secrecy to find out what's really on my heart. And that's what's telling about Zedekiah and all this, um, in his secret questioning of Jeremiah. Okay, be honest with me. Is there something that God has said? When he should have said, is there something that God has already said that I haven't listened to? See, we think it's revelation, but it's just illumination.
Right.
We think God is causing a breakthrough, but he's just shedding light on what's already been there. You understand what I mean? And so that's where this whole idea of Zedekiah asking Jeremiah in this position, hey, let me know what's God got going on, right? And so here we go. This is Jeremiah in verse 20 is saying, now here, please, oh my Lord the King, let my humble plea come before you, and do not send me back to the house of Jonathan, the secretary, lest I die there. I've served my time there. I can't do anymore. You know what I mean? It's if I have to go back there, I'm bound to die. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the conditions, and they made it a prison, but was it meant to be a prison?
Right.
And so he survived many days, and with that, we've got on here what Jeremiah is asking of the king. Don't have me go through this anymore, right? And he breaks it down, and he says, I can't do this. And the king actually offers Jeremiah a little bit of relief. right? He has Jeremiah moved to be under the guard of the palace in the court, and also daily rations of bread, good through until the city runs out of bread, and that's where Jeremiah remains at the end of
This
chapter 37.
a couple of things that we see. The king could have set Jeremiah free, but he probably put him where he put him for protection, because
Mm-hmm.
the other officials were definitely out to get Jeremiah. And God always has a way of escape for those that are his own. That's one thing that I really got out of this. But the other thing that I got out of this is that just because you're a child of God does not mean you may not suffer some things for the cause of Christ. And we really need to hone in on that, because so often uh, in a lot of modern day preaching, they said, well, if you get saved, every day going to be Sunday. You're going to have everything that you need. Never have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about getting sick or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You can declare it and speak it, and it is so. And that is really not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's part of the perspective problem.
Yes.
We have so many people that have the wrong perspective on entering into Christianity. I remember reading about the only believe movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just believe, have more faith, just believe, pray more, just believe, right? And the movement had this, what they call swelling of growth, because all you had to do was believe, and that's it. But when it came to Christian living,
Mm-hmm.
much like we see in the Gospel of John, when John 6:66, when the disciples of Jesus say, "This is hard for anybody. You know what? How's anybody going to be saved?"
Right. This is a
You know,
hard saying.
yeah. What are you talking about? And it says they walked no more
No, no more with him.
with the Lord. They did. Man, I'm out. I can't do that. They withdrew, and so in the same vein, once people see what it is and what it amounts to be Christian, some people are like, oh no, I can't do that. That's too much for me, right? And it's interesting because when Jesus is talking about discipleship, um, we often talk about it in Christian finance and planning, but he said in regards to discipleship, following him, count up the cost.
Right.
Count up the cost. Do you have enough to make it through? Do you have enough to fight the war? Do you have enough to complete the construction of this edifice? Do you have enough in you? Count it up. Otherwise, somebody's going to look and say, oh, look at that fool that started that, and the thing is
Couldn't
half
finish it.
finished. So much so that when we see the correlation in the epistles, you know, he who has begun a good work in you, well, what? He's going to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to finish it, right? And so that's where the balance is, you know. And so as believers, right? We've got to go beyond just our entry level belief.
Right.
And oh, I'm not gonna lie, man. I went to Lutheran school for a period, and Lutheran school, um, my experience was we're gonna keep you out of hell by scaring the hell out of you. You know what I mean? And so even the tracks that they would
Sounds like
share,
Catholic school to me.
I mean these tracks were gory with like these end of time tracks where like
Mhm.
people's heads being chopped off and line up and get the mark of the beast, and then you're like, whoa, I don't want any part of that. They said, well, here you go, take door number 2. It wasn't
Right.
let me come into the love of Jesus. Let me it's like, oh, that's the best option, because the other one was like you're gonna be walking around with 666 on your head, and or get your head cut off. So it wasn't steeped in teaching. It was fair tactic,
Right.
right? And so you can't build faith on fear, and so that was a loss, for them, and so considering that, that's where my experience was on that. And so if we're looking at um, God's people, right? What do you got? You got to teach them, thus saith the Lord.
Right.
You know, and so Pastor, looking at this chapter, what do you see as some final things for people out there in your words?
Um, the final thing that I see is that when God has made up his mind that something is going to come down, he's not changing it, no matter what you do. And um, we also need to take a heart what it says in 2 Timothy 3:12, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. So, in other words, you know, we have scriptures in the Bible that say, gird up your loins. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be prepared for this thing. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It's not a cakewalk. But what comes at the end is so glorious, you don't want to miss it by turning back.
Mm. Yeah, I'll just wrap it up with this. Look at how people shift or adjust and maneuver within the public and the private.
Mm-hmm.
They're not listening to you. They're throwing you off. They're saying you're wrong privately. I mean publicly, but privately they're coming to you for counsel.
Mm-hmm.
Privately they're coming to you for care. Privately they're coming to you saying, "Pray for me." Privately they're coming to you saying, "Do you think that God is so?" In I believe Greco-Roman mythology, it breaks it down. There is a two-faced being called Janus,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the idea behind the word hypocrite. That they're like Janus, Janus, where they're showing you one face, but behind that is another face, and at some point the mask has to come off
Right.
of the hypocrite, and so you've got your true nature has to be one way or another. And so as a believer, don't be surprised who you find that publicly scorns you, but privately seeks you out.
Mm-hmm.
You will. I pretty much guarantee you will have that experience if you haven't already had it. You know, so just be mindful and see that example here. That here it is, someone that doesn't listen to Jeremiah, who leads the people who don't listen to Jeremiah, and he comes to him privately and says, "Hey, is there a word from the Lord?" And so trust that. Trust that the Bible gives us experiences that we'll see and hear about and recognize that in that this is for our learning. This is so that, as you said, that we can gird up, that we can be prepared, and we can deal with things as they come at us from a spiritual nature, right? And so next week we'll get into chapter 38. We'll keep rolling,
And
and we'll keep
chapter
pushing this thing along.
38 starts out with a bang.
Yeah, you know. So we're not going to give any spoilers. Jesus, jump in, jump on it, and join us next Wednesday at 11. All right. So it's been live at lunch Bible study. Take care. God bless and Godspeed.
God bless you all.